What is self-evident? You can't deny it. Everyone, logically and by reason, you know this, that all men are created equal. Now think about the time in which they made these pronouncements, okay? They were declaring their independence from Great Britain, where they had the divine right of kings, right? They said all men are created equal. That was anathema to the Brits, right? They said, what do you mean? Some men have a better station. Some men are better than others. They have superior rights. And we over here said, no, no, no. Everyone's created equal because God creates man equally. And all men, therefore, are endowed by their Creator, God Himself, with certain inalienable rights. What is an inalienable right? It's a right that the government, no man, no tyrant, no king can take away from you because it comes from your transcendent Creator Himself. And among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was the idea that there were rights beyond the dominion of a man-centered government was absolute. It was an absolutely incredible notion at the time. And then they said, of course, that all of this was done, quoting the Declaration, in accordance with the laws of nature and of nature's God, and with a firm reliance upon the protection of divine providence. Wow, I thought we had a totally secular nation, right? I thought there was separation of church and state. What are they talking about? God and the laws of nature. Here's what we have to understand, and what we were not taught. If you went to public school, high school, you were not taught this in your civics class and your history class, very likely, unless you had a teacher who was really into like the original history books and not the revised versions. But it was a fundamental principle under the natural law philosophy explained by Sir William Blackstone and John Locke and all those writers that influenced the founders, that civil laws could never contradict the laws of God. Now, how do you know the laws of God? Well, they're revealed through nature, the laws of nature and of nature's God, and through the Bible, because that was their source. Now, let me put this simply in some modern language, as the Gipper would say. The Founding Fathers believed that faith in God was the key to our being a good people, and America's becoming a great nation. And that puts it pretty simply and concisely. But the secular progressives today tell us something very different, right? They say, Ronald Reagan was senile. That's nonsense. Of course, the faith in God has nothing to do with America being a great nation. In fact, we're a completely secular nation, and you have to have a complete dichotomy between religion and your public life. And so you Christians, you guys, if you want to believe in God, that's fine, but do it on Sunday morning in your little Sunday school. Don't bring it over here into our public discourse. Don't come over here into the public square and bring your religious notions in here to talk about important public affairs. Because your religion is something personal and subjective, and it's a touchy-feely thing. What we're talking about over here is reason and logic in the public discourse. And so they have convinced our entire generation of people that that's right. Oh, gee, I don't want to be intolerant. I don't want to bring my religion into the public square, and so I'll have it totally separate. Yeah, that's right. If I'm going to pray, I just need to do it on Sunday morning with my own little family, and I don't need to talk about that out here as it relates to all these social and moral issues of the day. Well, that is the complete opposite of what the founders believed. Look at George Washington, the father of our country. Remember, we called him the father of our country. They wanted George Washington to be the king, but he was too humble. He didn't believe God was leading us in that form of government. And so he became our first president. And as you know, in his farewell address, September 19th of 1796, he's leaving his public life. He's been our famous general, our first leader, the father of our nation. And he says this. He's giving his advice to his fellow countrymen. He says, listen, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. What does he mean by that? What's an indispensable support? Washington was saying, listen, we have built here an experiment. It's called a constitutional republic. This is not something that we do by chance. We're not sure. We believe God's divinely inspired us to do it this way, but we frankly don't know how long it will survive and thrive. But here is the key. My fellow countrymen, this echoes down through the generations to you and me. Listen to what the founders said. He said, look, this republic is not built on sand. It's built on a very firm foundation. In fact, there are two pillars. It's called religion and morality. That is not only the ceiling on your personal behavior, but that is the foundation of our entire system of government. And if there ever comes a day when religion and morality are whittled away or disrespected or chipped at, then the entire proverbial house we're building is subject to fall. That is where we find ourselves today. We no longer cherish these. John Adams, our second president, said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly unfit for the governance of any other. Here's another founder, Dr. Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration, the first father of public schools. He said, the only foundation for a republic is to be laid in religion, because without this, there can be no liberty. And liberty is the object in life of all republican governments. Now, the big debate now, okay, right now is, are we a Christian nation or not, right? You've heard this. And people get all upset about this, okay? The answer to the question has long been decided. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court has specifically declared that we're a Christian nation. It goes back to 1892 in the famous case of Church of Holy Trinity versus the U.S. The Supreme Court did an exhaustive review of our history. They looked at 87 historical records. They looked at volumes of historical evidence from America's discovery, our first colonies, our first governments, the American Revolution and acts of Congress, as well as the executive and legislative branches, volumes of the writings of the founders themselves, and this is what they concluded. We are a Christian nation, and this is historically true. From the discovery of this continent to the present hour, there is a single voice making this affirmation. These are not individual sayings, declarations of private persons. They are organic utterances, referring to all these historical documents they looked at. They speak the voice of the entire people. These and many other matters which might be noticed add a volume of unofficial declarations to the mass of organic utterances that this is a Christian nation. Now, does that mean that we're going to go out and force everybody to be Christians? Absolutely not. Because we believe in free speech and liberty of conscience and all those principles that are articulated in the Bill of Rights. It does, however, mean that from a historical perspective, it is accurate to say that we are a Christian nation. That is how we began. And I will argue that's how we do best. Right? The Supreme Court in 1952 said in Zorek v. Clausen, we are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being. So there's always been this recognition. But the problem is now we're moving away from the laws of nature and of nature's God. And we're doing that at the peril of our nation. A lot of people now ask, now how does this happen? Okay, if all that's true, and the history is so certain, and we know for a fact that we began as a Christian nation, then how did it happen? How did we get away from this firm foundation and drift so far? Well, here's a quick summary of how that happened, okay? If you want to be an expert in our cultural drift, here's 2 slides to relay it for you, okay? In the 18th century, at the founding of America, biblical morality was widely understood and embraced and taught. The Bible was the first textbook in the public schools. All those things were true. But, and that was consistent until you got to about the 1930s, okay? In the early part of the 20th century, thanks for doing that, the founders' natural law philosophy was gradually replaced by something else. It was called relativism. This is a painting of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was a Supreme Court justice and one of the leaders of this movement that took us away from natural law philosophy. Why does this matter to you? Why should you care? Because listen to what these guys proposed, okay? Relativism, or legal positivism, it goes by many names, is a philosophy that basically says this. Views are to be evaluated relative to the societies or cultures in which they appear. And so they must not be judged true or false or good or bad, because there is no absolute standard of right and wrong after all. It's very subjective. It's very relative. And so every person or group can decide these questions for themselves. In other words, don't come in here and tell me what is right or wrong, because no one can really define what's right or wrong. When I had the debate with the ACLU president, that was her line of argument. You can't say that's right or wrong, because who are you to say what's right? It might be right or wrong for you, but not for me. Don't push that on me. This is where this philosophy came from. Now, here's what it means in the context of the law. When applied to the law, this philosophy means if there are no objective God-given standards of law, then who creates the standards of law? Man, right? And since God is not the author of law, the author has to then be man. In other words, the law is the law simply because the highest human authority at the time, the state, or some tyrant, or some king, says that it is. And since man and society evolve, well, of course, law has to evolve as well. Now, who are going to be the persons or the class of persons that guide the evolution of the law? It'll be judges. They're going to guide it through their decisions. That's a very dangerous premise. So what happened was Justice Holmes and all of his colleagues began to push this idea of moral relativism in the court decisions. So it made it into the court decisions, and then it filtered down into the university. So in the academy, the professors picked up on this idea. They began to push this. And the idea was, we're smart now. That old biblical morality and all those notions that the founders had, oh, that's so old-fashioned. Now we're enlightened. Now we know better. Man is smart. We're the center of the universe. We're going to order our affairs in such a way. And so on the college and the universities, they began to teach this, and so it filters down. The next generation brings us the 1960s and 1970s, okay? Because what we tolerate in moderation, our children excuse in excess. So one generation later, we got the complete counterculture. We got Woodstock and the invention of sexual revolution and things like no-fault divorce and the radical brand of feminism where they said a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, okay? All that stuff was at its core about the rejection of absolutes. It was the final and ultimate thumbing of our nose at God and His ordained creation for society, okay? Now, there's some very certain effects that befall any nation that makes these kinds of collective decisions. You and I read the Bible. We know what that's all about. And I don't have to spend a lot of time going through it with you, but just know this. As religious values diminish and lose influence, a culture becomes more coarsened. In October of last year, Kelly and I attended the 28th annual Shreveport-Bossier Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. Okay, they have this annual thing. It draws about 700 local leaders and all that. This year, the guest speaker was a guy by the name of Mike Barber. He was a former NFL great from football players back there. You might know the name. I think he's in the Hall of Fame, but now he does full-time prison ministry. Okay, he was the speaker at the breakfast, and he explained to the audience the fastest-growing industry in America today is building prisons and housing inmates. The fastest-growing industry in America, and everybody went this collective sigh, and then we looked it up later, and it's true. And in fact, he told us 49% of inmates in prisons nationwide are under the age of 19. Now, I remember that morning so vividly because I was leaving that event and I was listening to our local talk news radio station for a morning news update, 710 Keel if you're from Shreveport, the AM station. And they were telling the story. The top story on the news that morning was a report about a 12-year-old boy arrested in Shreveport for aggravated rape of 3 7-year-old boys, okay, in Shreveport, in the buckle of the Bible Belt. Now, we have a problem in the culture. I don't need to go through all the lowlights, but I want to show you a couple of slides that illustrate this alarming decline, okay? And now, before we look at these numbers, I want you to think of this. In 1829, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story noted, quote, "One of the beautiful boasts of our municipal jurisprudence is that Christianity is a part of the common law," unquote. He wisely recommended to law students that they should, quote, "examine well the precepts of religion as the only solid basis of civil society," unquote. You hear this familiar refrain from all the founders. Now,